Welcome everyone to yet another CPR CSH talk, and very happy today to welcome Shweta, who I've had the privilege of listening to before, but and who's recently been published in EPWRUA also, the same paper that she's presenting today. So it's really interesting because it's an unusual confluence of epidemiology and urban research. We don't see that very often, but with the pandemic, I think a lot of us have now started thinking about health and public health as a lens to look at many of the issues that we've traditionally looked at. So, with that in mind, we thought Shweta would be a really good addition to this series. And thank you all for joining in on a weekend, on a week that's sandwiched between one long weekend and the other long weekend. So without much delay, I'm sure more people will join as we go along, but let's start the talk. I'm handing over to Shweta. Thank you so much for doing this. You have about 45 minutes as agreed to talk, and then we'll open for questions. And for the audience, if you can just put all your questions in the Q&A box, or you can wait till the end and raise your hand. Either which way is fine. As you already know, if you raise your hand, you will be brought into the discussion through the audio channel, and we can have a more collaborative and sort of more interactive discussion later. So over to you, Shweta.
Thank you so much, Makta. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I hope that now you can see my screen, see my PPT.
Yes, we can see it. Go
Okay. Ahead. So, as you know, my presentation is titled Khula area on the urban and the pathological. And this is based on my doctoral work, which was broadly looking at, as Mukta also said, the relationship between the epidemics and the city, more ethnographically focused on dengue epidemic in Delhi. So structurally, how I'm going to go about with this presentation is that I'll tell you briefly the conceptual background of my work. That is important to understand the ethnographic details that I'm going to put later. Briefly, I'll also tell you in the beginning what the field area has been. And after we delve into the ethnographic inputs, we'll see what we can analyze and understand by putting it all together. And after that, of course, I'll be suggestion because it's also a developing work right now. So the first conceptual underpinning that I want all of us to have in order to understand this work is this. Right now on your screen, what you're looking at is a list. This list I have taken a screenshot from WHO's website. And this is WHO's list of diseases that are priority for research and development in emergency context. So there are several diseases in the list. Very importantly and very interestingly, at the end of this list, what you see is disease X. And we all know X stands for something that is unknown. WHO also defines it at the end of this screenshot. You are seeing something written in italics, and I'll read it out. Disease X represents the knowledge that a serious international epidemic could be caused by a pathogen currently unknown to cause human disease. The R&D blueprint explicitly seeks to enable early cross-cutting R&D preparedness that is also relevant for an unknown disease X. So public health discourse right now has moved from studying an epidemic to studying the possibility of an unknown epidemic that is yet to happen. Okay, and to quote Veena Das, epidemics have always been, to borrow the term from her, critical events. That means the events that have always been, capable of structuring social and political around it. But now we are looking at the time where even the possibility of epidemic can do that. And that's why public health discourse and consequently the medical anthropology has also shifted from studying the epidemic that has happened to studying an epidemic that is yet to happen. So happening of or epidemic, whether or not it could take place, it's not the question of if, it's the question of when. So epidemic is always lurking, it's going to happen. And we are supposed to study that. We are almost always have to be in the state of, as this definition also says, preparedness. So how does dengue in Delhi fits into this? So dengue in Delhi is an epidemic that is never absent. So Delhi, which is also the site of this study, it faced a major dengue outbreak in 1996. So this was the outbreak where around 10,000 people were infected and almost 500 people died because of dengue. And that's why this was the epidemic that garnered a lot of political and media attention. After this one, city administration was pushed to formulate specific strategies for dengue, and also they hired frontline workers which were dedicated to work on dengue and control the breeding of dengue mosquitoes around urban habitats. There are a few epidemiological facts that I just want to highlight. I don't want to bore anyone with too much, but there are a couple of things that are important for us to know. One is dengue, just to tell you briefly, is an epidemic-prone viral infection, which was earlier considered a problem of tropical countries like India, but now it has a global presence. So much so that WHO has now labeled as world's fastest growing pandemic in the world. And its expansion, its spread is now primarily attributed to rapid urbanization, which is mostly unplanned in most of the part of the world. Also, very importantly, its vector, that is Aedes mosquito, it prefers humans as a source. In fact, it exclusively feeds on humans. And it also breeds in small, clean, anthropogenic water bodies. That sort of disrupts the link we usually draw between the dirt and mosquito. Also, as of now, there are no specific medication available for it. So any medication the doctors give you if you have dengue is symptomatic. As of now, no vaccine is available for mass consumption. Some are in the trial phase. So consequently, and why this is important, because now the dengue control depends on exclusively on mosquito breeding prevention. And that is why city administration, every year, there is something called dengue season unofficially, or around March, April to, let's say, September, October in Delhi. So even though dengue epidemic doesn't happen every year, so there are a few infections, of course, every year around that time, especially. Even though dengue epidemic that doesn't happen every year around a certain time, we see a heightened activity around dengue and dengue mosquito control, because now it's an epidemic that can happen anytime. So any year it could happen. Okay. So we have to be in the continuous state of preparedness. It's something as we also understood how global public health is also moving. Briefly to tell you about my field area, of course, it's Delhi. What you're seeing right now is the municipal corporation map of Delhi. It used to be divided till 2022 in 3 zones by municipal corporation. So North, South, and East Delhi. East Delhi is the smallest, yet the most densely populated. It is usually the focus of authorities because of several reasons. We'll see why. This is the pinkish polished part on the right side of the map. And since Delhi, now all these zones have been reunified, and it's the single municipal corporation now. But till the time of my field work, it was divided like this, and that's why I'll be referring to several parts. I just want to give you a couple of disclaimers here. One, whenever I'll be using some of the abbreviations or acronyms, you will see its full form on your screen. Second, any names that I'll be using during the course of my ethnography, I have changed it. They are pseudonyms. And third, there are some Hindi narratives that I'll be using, not because I'm expecting everyone to understand Hindi, but because this fieldwork took place in Hindi, and at times it was important to retain the texture of colloquial. And you have seen the title itself is Khula area, and Khula is the Hindi word. But wherever and whenever Hindi narratives are appearing, I'll be translating them. You'll also see the translation on your screen. More specifically, in field site in Delhi or in East Delhi, there's a neighborhood, Sonia Vihar. There's a screenshot from Google Map. This neighborhood is the largest ward of East Delhi, and this was considered one of the most sensitive, quote unquote, sensitive area or vulnerable area in the context of dengue epidemic. And that's why this is a focus of authority. Eventually, it also became my ethnographic focus. This area shares one of its borders with Yamuna River and another border with the adjoining state Uttar Pradesh or UP. And this ward also recorded the highest number of dengue and chikungunya infections in 2015 dengue outbreak, which as of now is the last dengue outbreak in Delhi. As of now, after that, we of course have dengue infections, but after that Delhi hasn't really recorded another outbreak. But as I said, continues to be in the state of preparedness, so that if dengue happens, we all should be ready. All right. The another conceptual underpinning that is important to understand the ethnographic details of this work is the idea of pathological. And though the implication of this is far beyond it, the concept of normal and pathological is rooted primarily in medicine. So, a historian and philosopher of medicine, George Kengelhem, arguing against the vitalist conception of normal as a fixed norm and pathological as a statistical deviation from the norm, argued for a more dynamic and contextual understanding of normal and pathological, while defining normal as the ability of an organism to adapt to its milieu. I mean, this is his large argument, but even he pointed out that in case of Western medicine, especially in case of infectious diseases, medical system prioritizes the vitalist norm as it believes that to act, it is necessary to localize. Now, Kangelham's student, Foucault, he extended his ideas two ways. First, he showed this shift in modern medicine that enables the mapping of patient's body to find out what is ailing them. So there's a famous observation from his work that medicine has shifted from asking, how do you feel, to asking, where is the pain? So that instinct to locate it somewhere. So he further shows the second very important addition that Foucault has done to his teacher's work, that he has brought this idea of pathological from the realm of medicine to the realm of social and political. So through his analysis of prison, clinic, asylums, and hospitals, he has shown how locating becomes a ground for control and even segregation of disease and diseased bodies. Then his contemporary, Richard Sennett, in this line, his work can be seen as understanding cities as bodies writ large. Sennett studies several cities of Western civilization historically to understand urban spaces through bodily experience. By describing ancient Athens, Rome, and Paris, his work shows how political and religious belief about the body shaped these cities and their public spaces. To comment on modern cities such as London and New York, he argues that physician named William Harvey, who basically discovered the blood circulatory system, this system gave a way to imagine cities as system of veins. Hence, communal spaces and freely floating bodies, and also the crowds, were seen as too chaotic and nuisance to be controlled, which made the city mirror the circulatory system. In the context of very recently, in the context of COVID-19, in the work of Giorgio Agamben, who partly based it on Foucault's work, it's something we have also seen. So in Middle Ages, Foucault describes plague towns. That means people who have plagued have been, segregated, separated, and they could only move by risking either infection, spreading the infection, or getting punishment. So if we put these three works together, they give us the conceptual basis or conceptual foregrounding to understand this instinct to locate and segregate, both bodily and spatially. So how that kind of segregation works in urban spaces. So with these two conceptual underpinnings, that means how the possibility of pandemic or epidemic has to be controlled, and second, what is pathological and why how is there an instinct to locate pathological. With this, I'll delve into my ethnographic details. And through ethnographic details, what I'm going to basically show you that in the anticipation of another dengue epidemic, Delhi, with the aim to control mosquito breeding, in Delhi, what happens then is the official gaze primarily focuses on areas that are considered inherently dirty, areas at the margin of the city populated by working class migrants living in unauthorized colonies. The residents of such area, however, have to deal with the absence of basic urban infrastructure such as a sewage system, garbage disposal system, water pipelines, etc. on one hand, while also being under the stringent administrative glare for pest control. What is interesting here is that both inhabitants of these areas and as well as their administrator, they both express their frustration with the area, its ungovernable stubbornness, using the expression Khula area. Kula, literally open, it means open in Hindi, signifies, among other things, the openness of these areas to the flow of materials, body, and consequently infections across an interstate border. Urban dwellers narrate their vulnerability through this expression, while administrators and frontline workers use it in exasperation, highlighting their frustration with the area and its inhabitant. Through ethnographic inputs of various actors, and I have streamlined this ethnography, so 4 categories of informant: scientists, city administrators, frontline workers, and residents of East Delhi. We'll see that Khula kept shifting its signification as well as its location with several users. This is one of the most important things for us to note during ethnography. Overall, my work is going to argue that Khula is an empty signifier, and through its many meanings, it enables us to explore how a city is imagined, inhabited, and governed. So I'll start with, as I told you, there are 4 kind of people that I'm going to tell you the narratives from. So I'll start with a scientist from NCDC, that is National Center for Disease Control. So an epidemiologist from NCDC, I was interviewing him around dengue and dengue mosquito and dengue control efforts in Delhi. And he said, he kind of declared, Metropolis must be mosquito-free zone. He told me then many technical and biological facts about mosquitoes, ranging from their habit, habitat, anatomy, ergonomics, etc. And he emphasized that knowing mosquitoes well is the first step to controlling mosquito-borne diseases. After about an hour-long monologue about mosquitoes biology, he asked me about my work till then, the institutions that I've worked with, and the places that I have visited. Once he learned that I was working with the Municipal Corporation of Delhi, that is MCD, with a focus on East Delhi, he said that he agreed that, yeah, East Delhi is the problem, and then he elaborated, and I quote him, ईस्ट दिल्ली में 50,000 भी डीबीसी कर दिया जाए ना तो डेंगू खत्म नहीं होगा, वो खुला एरिया है. Even 50,000 DBC won't be able to control dengue in East Delhi. It is khula area. There will always be 1 or 2 houses there which won't give you access to the household. These houses will have enough breeding to infect the whole neighborhood. I have taught you many things about mosquitoes, but सिर्फ theory पे entomology नहीं चलती, practical भी देखना होता है. So entomology, the study of insects, does not work with only with theory. We must look at practice as well. So the entomologist has stated his expectation from the city, as I said, that detailed the method to fulfill his expectation about mosquitoes biology and how it is important to know them. And eventually he considered that it was not achievable. And the reason for this all was that was a Khula area. Khula area, interestingly, when I start talking to, I mean, it all was happening simultaneously, but I have chronologically arranged it. When I talked to a city administrator, more specifically a chief medical officer that I'm going to quote right now with EDMC, he said, and he first asked me again, what is it that I'm working on and what are the areas he told me I should look at. And I told him that I've already started field work in East Delhi and I'm focusing on East Delhi. Then he asked me, do you know what is something called PBP? He mentioned, do you know what is PBP? And at that time, I didn't know. So he was kind of surprised. And he said, you don't know what a PBP is. They have not shown it to yet. पहले ही दिन दिखा देना चाहिए था. They should have shown it to you the first day. He was quite astonished and as well as irritated that I didn't know what a PBP is. And he tried to draw something and tried to show me what a PBP is. He draws something like a vantage point that looked like a vantage point, and out of which 2 waves are emerging. And he said, the northeast zone of EDMC is Khula area. So in East Delhi and the northern border of it, where the Sonia Vihar is located, that's what he was referring to. So the northeast zone of EDMC is Khula area. The water of 2 places meet at this point, hence water gets logged. Consequently, a PBP is formed, a permanent breeding point. So that's what PBP was, permanent breeding point. Breeding is inevitable here. Whenever our team goes there for inspection, they ask the DBC in advance if there is a PBP here, so that if the breeding is found here, it won't be considered a DBC's fault. Hence, now again, you can see Khula has reappeared in the testimony, and this time in the testimony of a city administrator. This time, though, we are getting some material explanation of its vulnerability to epidemics. So water come from rural places, it meets here, etc., etc. However, from his drawing, it was very difficult to grasp the idea of something like a vantage point where the water logs and mosquito breeds, etc. He again tried to explain to me, think of it as a backyard to your home, to which you have no access, hence you cannot clean it. So he gave me another analogy, but even then I wasn't very sure of what he's talking about. And he was again irritated. He called Sonia Vihar office and talked to the office in charge and said, मैडम को आपने अभी तक पीबीपी नहीं दिखाया, वही तो पूरी बुकलेट है. You have not shown her the PPP yet. That's the key to understand the area. And then he, after his call, he turned to me and said, do you understand now the problem with this place? Have you seen South Delhi workers? They have tabs. And these people, he meant the EDMC, East Delhi Municipal Corporation frontline workers. So these people have not shown you the PBP yet. To get any work done here is a miracle. खुला एरिया है ना, थोड़ा वर्कर्स की यूनियन बाजी का चक्कर है यहाँ. So he was saying that workers here unionize, and that's why they don't work as efficiently as South Delhi workers. And he was referring to this union of all the frontline workers of malaria department of EDMC. You can look at the picture from one of their demonstrations. What happens is that they continue to be ad hoc worker because nobody thought that dengue is going to be something. They were hired on ad hoc basis in the beginning, and they continue to be ad hoc. So from time to time, they agitate to demand their regularization. So that's the these are the unions, and these are the dharna, etc., that he was referring to, that they're unionized, they're union bars. After that, of course, next day, it was after his call, it was arranged that I'll look at whenever I go to the Sonia Vihar ward, the frontline workers there would show me the PBP, the permanent breeding point. So next day, when I arrived at the malaria office, I instead found all the DBCs. DBC is domestic breeding checkers. It is on your screen, which I'm just telling you. So that we know domestic breeding checkers are more specifically the frontline workers that were hired after 1996 dengue outbreak, and they are the ones who specifically work on dengue. So I arrived there to find DBCs busy in the process that they were calling gadde lagana. Gadde banana, sorry. So it was around 3 feet large sack, or which something that we colloquially call bori. They had that, and they were filling the pieces of cotton in it. Once they filled the cotton, they tried to beat it and readjust the cotton, fill more cotton. After that, they started pouring on it a very strong smelling, diesel-like smelling liquid. They were calling it dawa, and they told me that it has been adulterated with insecticidal chemicals. So they started pouring on it. After that, again, they'll adjust the cotton and then pour the liquid. The process went on for like a few more minutes, and it was repeated so that the gadda is properly drenched with insecticide. And after that, we started to go conduct a process which was called gatte lagana in their official language. So all of us, I and DBC, once we walked for a while through their office, we stopped at a narrow road underneath which a drain was flowing. This drain was merging with a large open drain of stagnant water with garbage floating on its surface. The unfinished portion of the road towards the open drain had some of the iron rebars protruding out of it several places. Once there, the frontline workers tied the gadda with the rope at one of the rebars that we can see in the screen, see on the screen. As the onlookers observed us with great interest, the frontline workers gradually dipped gadda in the drain so that most of it was immersed in the water. So here, it's a little difficult angle, and also the place which was not very conducive to look at the picture. But you can see a frontline worker that is pouring a liquid, which is insecticide, diesel mixed with insecticide. And you can see a bori, a sack, on which the frontline worker is pouring a medicine or an insecticide. So he gradually dipped the gadda in the drain so that most of it was immersed in water. Now we can only see the recently stitched mouth of gadda. So it can be a little confusing again because you're only seeing the mouth of the gadda, but it's dipped inside. Yeah. So now the officer in charge, Deepak ji, the officer in charge of Sonia Vihar's malaria office, he walked to me and said, all the mosquitoes are going to die now. He pointed towards the water for me and added, now dawa will create a film over water and all the mosquitoes will die. We'll come after every 15 days or so and pour dawa on gadda so that it remains saturated with dawa all the time. Once this was done, I asked Deepak ji, because it was the day I was supposed to look at PBP. So I asked him, why are we looking at gaddas? Aren't we supposed to look at the PBP today? But he replied, pointing towards the open drain where we have just put gadda, this is PBP. This is our word's largest, but it was something that I needed more explanation about. So after this humongous effort, how can this remain a permanent breeding point? To which Deepakji pointed to the backside of the Gadda and said, this dirty water is coming from UP. ये सारा का सारा यूपी का गंदा पानी आ रहा है पीछे से. Sometimes it comes with such a force that our gadda floats away. How can we control it? We can only tie these gaddas on our side, he meant Delhi, and there is no surveillance system on the UP side of the border. Now that, I mean, I was beginning to understand what the CMO was trying to say through this vantage point thing and where the water from the two places meet, etc. Now, in addition to its material and special qualities, Deepakji pointed to the another characteristic of area. He pointed to the other side of the road and said, and that's why these two DBC workers were standing and they said, see that narrow lane, right side is UP and left side is Delhi. People here have two IDs. ये लोग ब्रीडिंग पकड़े जाने पर यूपी वाले हो जाते हैं और इलाज कराने के लिए दिल्ली वाले हो जाते हैं. So the residents here claim to be from UP when we find breeding in their premises and become Delhi residents to claim health facilities. How is surveillance possible here? ये खुला area है ना. Now, I mean, in addition to pointing at the confluence of material, he was also pointing to the entanglement at the level of population. So UP का पानी आ रहा है, Delhi का पानी भी आ रहा है, but they're also telling us that residents here have two IDs, UP and Delhi. So making disease surveillance impossible here. So, and he obviously said Khula in a tone as if it's self-explanatory. So Khula area, no? That's why this is happening. So I asked him what is Khula meant. He pointed indiscriminately towards the field and the drain in front of him, and he said that it means completely open. मतलब open है सारा का सारा और क्या? So as if I should understand what Khula means. So I of course know what Khula means in Hindi. I needed more than literal translation, and very soon I was told what he meant by Khula area. So he said Khula area है मैडम, कच्ची जमीन है, कच्ची कॉलोनी है, घर घर में नेता है, घुसने नहीं देते, टंकी कूलर चेक नहीं करने देते, इधर यमुना का पानी भर जाता है, उधर बॉर्डर है. So what this meant is this is Khula area, unmetalled road, unauthorized colonies. Everyone acts like a VIP. They do not let us enter their homes to check their water tanks and water coolers. And as I told you, that dengue mosquito breeds in clean contained water. So that's what they're referring to. So Yamuna River on this side and state border on the other. So all the problems he enumerated that according to him made Sonia Viha challenging to manage. In his testimony, the special qualities like kachi zameen, frequent flooding, proximity to Yamuna River, interstate border, legal status such as unauthorized colonies, and moral qualities of residents who avoid the eye of state appear together as if one implies the other. Here, we can see the collection of meanings of Khula is continuously expanding. So for scientists, it meant the area where the impeccable theoretical knowledge of entomology does not work. For city administrator, it is the area filled with union bars workers who are not as well equipped and as efficient as their counterparts in South Delhi. Furthermore, the frontline workers who are more intensively, I mean, that's why the definition gets even more broad, obviously, because they are the ones who are intensively involved with the day-to-day work of mosquito control. Khula is expanded to denote spatial, administrative, and moral features of the area and its residents. So Khula represents some inexplicable quality of the area due to which even the expert knowledge of insect behavior, disease-related data, and the meticulous process of gadde lagana, which we have just seen, fails to curb this area's epidemic prudeness. And I also want to draw attention to one important, you must have already noticed it, an important slippage in the meaning of Khula area. It is not just referring to location, even though obviously it seems like open area, that means anything can come into it, but it also continuously alluding to social and moral qualities of those who are inhabiting it. So residents who lie about their identity, they resist state's entry to their home, or the workers who would rather unionize than work. All of it is subsumed within the adjective Khula, in addition to, of course, its spatial, geographical, locational attributes. So now we can just go back to, we can recall what we started with. The idea of pathological and state does have this instinct to locate and segregate pathological. There are several works. I gave a very broad conceptual underpinning in the beginning. And now I wish to tell you more specific works, especially in India or even on Delhi, that have told us about this instinct with a very broad sense of pathological, what means pathological. So for instance, in history, Navaparna Ghosh has talked about how urban spaces in colonial Kolkata were first shaped by the racial ideas of purity and then by Hindu ideas of purity and pollution. So how paras were divided through these ideas. Similarly, Avadhen Sharan, while making the case for tracing the distinctive history of contemporary South Asian Asia, he has shown how certain elements, and not restricted to, such as meat and slaughterhouse, have been considered, to quote him literally, in the city out of place. On this platform itself, a few months ago, we heard I am forgetting the name right now. Rita Jyoti Bandyopadhyay. Yeah, so he talked about 20th century Kolkata and how majoritarianism shaped those spaces. And very similarly, if we come more specifically to the works on Delhi, Stephen Legg, in his work, he traces the spatial segregation and separation of red light area in colonial times. And he shows how Delhi worked to evict prostitutes from the walled city and how this process led to the construction of urban and colonial India. From Pulse Science, we have Ghazala Jamil's work, which tells us how Muslim areas, Muslim localities in Delhi were separated and segregated in certain pockets of the city. In more recent work, very recently in millennial turn, we have seen, and urban studies in India also consequently took millennial turn. We have seen works that trace how Delhi has been evicting certain things which don't look like city, which don't look legal. So for instance, slum have been, doesn't, because it doesn't fit into our imagination of world-class cities, and that's why they have to be segregated, they have to be kept out of sight. So these are the works, more specifically Asher Ghartner's work I would like to cite here. So these are the works that have shown us that how the idea, certain idea what fits into the city and what doesn't, and this idea to locate it and segregate this has always existed. So we can definitely ask what is new here if that instinct has already been there. So what I'm going to do is, we have seen three categories of informants: scientists and the CMO at EDMC and our frontline workers. Now, with the urban dwellers, we see how this idea of pathological, which is already as of now is very broad, already as of now contains many things in its meaning. It's going to get further destabilized. And due to this destabilization, what we can now say, now add to this idea of urban and pathological, or this instinct to locate pathological. So one of the residents of Sonia Vihar, Asha, she was one of my key informants. She took me one day to her house, and like many other houses around her, her house was about 2 feet lower than the room, where you could enter only by lowering your head and stepping on a wooden tool. From inside, however, it was nothing that I expected to find an area branded as dirty or problematic by the authorities. It was two-storied concrete house covered with tiles, water, and electricity connection, decent furniture and electronic appliances. It had all the signs of an upwardly mobile middle-class household, except for one characteristic, of course, its location. Being located in authorized colony in East Delhi, Asha's home, like most other houses in the locality, beneath their apparent modernity and upward mobility, bears the sign of the state's neglect of the area and the uncertainties the residents face in their day-to-day lives. For instance, the exterior surface of Asha's brick and mortar house was covered with tiles, but the walls seemed perpetually damp and the paint was chipping off in places. So Asha explained that the water often enters their home during the rainy season and leaves its mark in form of dampness, or what is locally called sealant, till long after. And if you remember, I just told you it was below the surface of the road, and that detail is important. I'll come to it in a bit. In a similar way, she owned expensive household objects such as furniture, vehicle, and electronic appliances. However, they needed to be protected from the various threats the area poses to the safety of objects, furnitures, such as sofa, bed, and electric appliances such as fridge were kept on a couple of bricks to protect them from being soaked in water, because as I told you, it enters the house in case of flooding, which is frequent in this region owing to the proximity with the Yamuna River. And also house had municipal water connections, but concealed pipe fitting all over the building, and also a overhead water tank for storage. But you can see containers of various sizes that are lined up in kitchen and bathroom for storing water, signifying the irregularity of municipal water supply in the area. So since Asha's home exhibited and the neighborhood, it exhibited all the characteristic, it seemed that I have finally located Khula area. So complicating the matter, Asha one day said to me, पहले यहाँ बहुत मच्छर थे, ये भी खुला एरिया था, अब तो सड़क बन गई. So this too had a lot of mosquitoes once, as this was खुला area. Now the roads have been constructed here. So I mean, she was implying that this was no longer a खुला area. Now, this statement was a bit confusing to me because one, I didn't expect residents also because the administrators were using it to tell me that this is a problematic area. I didn't expect residents also to use it, but they of course used it very frequently. I'm telling you one narrative right now, but residents also use this. And the way we have been looking at the narrative, so scientists said East Delhi is Khula area. Then our CMO said that Northeast zone of East Delhi is Khula area. And frontline workers working in Sonia Vihar will tell you that this is Khula area. If we go by anyone's narrative, Asha's home located in Sonia Vihar should definitely be in Khula area, but she's just telling us that this is no longer a Khula area. So I was a bit confused. So I asked her that what she meant by the Khula area and why her colony no longer qualifies as one. And her answer was even more puzzling. So she said, "Didn't you see my house is lower than the road? At first, it too was 7 feet above the road. अब इतनी बार सड़क बन गई है कि घर नीचा हो गया है." So now the road has been repaired so many times that the house surface have been lowered. So again, if not her locality is Khula area, then which, according to her, is Khula area? I asked her, and she took me to a different location to show me one day, and it was not very far from her home, and houses were also not very different from her. But there was one difference. The difference was the houses were no longer at the lower surface than the road at Asha's. They were instead built on platform that was up to 5 to 7, sometimes up to 5 to 7 feet higher than the road. I have to now climb the stairs to enter instead of lowering my head and stepping on stool as I had to do at Asha's. It's a kind of house that you are looking at on your screen right now. So there is a plinth on which a DBC worker is standing. He is writing the date of inspection, and another one is spraying insecticide. There is a water tank beneath this plinth, which is called Hodi. I'll come to again to importance of it. So this is the kind of houses that she was talking about, and these are the kind of houses that I saw in the neighborhood within Sonia Vihar where she took me. So she explained, जहाँ सड़क बाद में आती है और प्लॉट पहले खरीद लिए जाते हैं, वहां लोग ऐसे ही घर बनाते हैं. The places where plots are bought first and roads reach later, this is how the houses are built. So I have already told you these are the kind of houses that are built. And because of now the elevation of house, I can see the water tank structure made of brick and mortar. I don't think you can see it, but at the right bottom of the picture, you can probably see some garbage right next to the stairs that is coming out of the structure that I'm going to describe right now. So it was referred to Hodi right outside each house. I could hear an electric motor buzzing inside Hodi and a water pipe coming out, which must be carrying water, but I was unsure where to. So each wadi, as a resident explained to me, is 2-3 feet deep and acts as a reservoir of wastewater coming out of the house, whatever their daily usage of the water is. After every few days, house resident dispose of wastewater in the nearby vacant plot through an elaborate system of pipe and electric motor. And those vacant plots are abundant in this area because this kind of unauthorized colonies are continuously, I mean, they're still to be inhabited. So vacant plots are a lot. So, and this management compensates for the absence of a state provided and municipality maintained water drainage system in the area. As one resident, Ramesh, while explaining me the system to me, remarked, यहाँ सरकार ने कुछ नहीं किया तो लोगों ने अपनी व्यवस्था खुद ही बना ली. The government did not do anything here, so the residents made their own arrangements. So finally, was this neighborhood within Sonia Vihar the Khula area? I asked myself where the abandoned by the state, people find alternative ways to develop and access basic infrastructure. To complicate the matter further, Ramesh remarked, go towards Fourth Pushta, another location he was referring to within Sonia Vihar. We at least have pipes for the drainage of wastewater. Women in that colony have to throw wastewater manually through a bucket. Khula area, that one is Khula area. So now you can understand my confusion and panic. I was thinking that I have located the area which is the most vulnerable in the context of dengue epidemic. So everyone is pointing me towards East Delhi and more specifically this particular neighborhood. But people in this neighborhood are pointing to some other area. Nobody is saying, yeah, this is Khula area. So at first it was of course confusing because everyone kept pointing to some different location. Every time I thought I've located Khula area, it moved further and I just didn't know where it is. But after a few months of fieldwork, a pattern began to emerge, and a pattern that I'll explain through this map. This is a handmade map by the Municipal Corporation Frontline workers. This is the map they use in order to navigate the area for dengue control, and consequently, I also used it. These maps are usually very reliable because being an unauthorized colony, I mean, it's still being inhabited, new constructions are coming up, and most of the things are unauthorized. So you wouldn't find municipal records at times or the official records, which will tell you the map of area. So on this map, you need to look at the screen. At the bottom of the map, you will see a wavy line that is Yamuna River. Right above that, there is a straight line that is Pushta Road. Pushta colloquially means river embankment, but here in East Delhi, it is also used to denote a road or sometimes neighborhood, colonies, mohallas, etc. So Pushta Road, this is the road that connects East Delhi to rest of the Delhi. Above this road, you're seeing vertical lines. At times, they're also zigzag. They are Pushta colonies and they are numbered. So 0 Pushta, first Pushta, second Pushta, at times also decimal, 2.5 Pushta. The Pehla Pushta, Dusra Pushta, Dhai Pushta, etc. So the pattern was that whenever I'm talking to someone from a different Pushta, they always point to some other Pushta as Khula area. So for instance, Asha lived on first Pushta and she pointed to fourth Pushta as Khula area. Ramesh, when I talked to, he lives on Dhai Pushta and he pointed to 0 Pushta as Khula area. And that was something that was a pattern that kept emerging and that kept repeating. So every time I'll talk to someone, they'll point to somebody else, something else as Khula area, not their area. So they'll say this is not Khula area, or this used to be Khula area, but it's no longer a Khula area. That one is a Khula area. So everyone just kept passing the ball. So now that we have seen these 4 categories of informants and how they talk about Khula area, it's important for us to put it all together and see what it means. So the way I wish to analyze it is through the idea of empty signifier. And the idea of empty signifier was conceptualized by Levi-Strauss while he was developing the idea of empty signifier through the mana in the introduction of Marcel Moss's work. Just to put it out there, mana is described by anthropologists over several works over the years. Among Melanesian, it refers to a supernatural force or power that may be ascribed to a person, spirits, or inanimate objects. Having mana has no stable meaning or predictable outcome. It can be good, evil, or beneficial or harmful. Its stability to exceed the signification led to Levi-Strauss calling it the most representative example of an empty signifier. And what is empty signifier? As Levi-Strauss has developed, and I quote, these notions have a fluid, spontaneous character, whereas elsewhere they serve as a ground of considered official interpretative system, a role, that is to say, which we ourselves reserve for science, but always and everywhere those types of notion, somewhat like algebraic symbols, occur to represent indeterminate value of signification, in itself devoid of meaning and thus susceptible to receiving any meaning at all. To put it simply, when I say a word, you understand the meaning because the words usually emit meaning. But the empty signifiers are the kind of words that absorb meaning. Okay, so it is a signifier without signified, and that's why it is susceptible to take many meanings. And you have seen through the course of this presentation, through the ethnography, that Kula has absorbed many, many meanings over the time. And not only it has many meanings, even the location kept shifting during the course of this presentation. And in case of empty signifier, Khula area, I mean, several works now have told us that this is empty signifier. So for instance, governance have been called an empty signifier. Sustainability have been called an empty signifier. Very interestingly, there is a work by literary critic Frederick Jameson. He says the shark in the movies Jaws is an empty signifier because shark represents, rather than just being a non-human, it is sort of a symbolic vehicle that represent collective anxieties, and that's why that is an empty signifier. But I mean, fine. I mean, it is absorbing many meanings. Maybe we can look at the analytical framework of empty signifier. But there has to be some political significance of it, and that's why I want to use the work by Ernesto Laclau, where he talks about the political significance of empty signifier. So as per him, he analyzed social revolutions or social movements, etc., calling the demands of social movements of several places as empty signifier, how they absorb many meanings over the course of evolution of any social movements. Here, what he very importantly argues is, even though any empty signifier gets emptied of meaning, there is some meaning that is retained, and that's what I want to draw your attention to. So no matter what meaning we take of Khula area, of course, it's the range of meaning is just increasing as we go by several testimonies. But Khula is always marker of some sort of derision and filth. So, for instance, for CMO, it's the area where people are hiding and breeding, mosquito breeding. For the scientists, it's that where the knowledge of entomology even fails. For CMO, it's the area where the workers unionize rather than work. For frontline workers, again, many things, a river that floods, people who hide their identities, and people who don't let them check their domestic spaces for mosquito breeding, etc. And most importantly, for residents as well, it signifies that they are living in an area where basic infrastructure is available. So they also keep passing the ball. So no matter whose testimony we go by, it's the marker of something that shouldn't be there in the city. And that's where I think the importance of Khula area and looking at urban and the relationship between the urban and the pathological through Khula is, because if we recall what we begin with, we are living in the time where, an epidemic is lurking everywhere. So it could happen anywhere. It could happen anytime. And that's why we have to be in the continuous state of anticipation and preparedness. And right now, just to quote some statistics from UNHRC, as the world is already like 50% population of the world is living in the cities, more than 75% population of the world is going to become urban by 2050. And it is going to mostly live in the cities of South Asian countries. And India is going to have the largest urban population after India is going to have the largest urban population after India, after China, sorry. So in population increasing and possibility of epidemic, how do we look at the city and the pathological, that relationship? And what are the nuances that we need to look at? What will be seen as, out of place in the city? Just to quote Avden Sharan, I somehow really like that phrase. So what is it that in the city and out of place, how do we look at, and how it will help us understand this relationship in the time where both epidemics and the urbanization is at its peak? How do we look at the relationship between these two, and what then it will enable us to say about the cities, how the cities are imagined, inhabited, and governed? That I think will be an interesting and also very important intersection to observe. So as I said it in the beginning, this is an developing work. So any thoughts, comments, suggestions that you have will help me a lot. So thank you so much. Let me know what you think about it and if you have any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Shweta. I think we can stop sharing the screen and we can
Sure.
get people in. Yeah, so we're open for questions. Thank you everyone for staying and listening through all the way till the end. I do know that right at the beginning somebody had put their hand up and then sort of taken it down, but now we can comment and okay, I'm just trying to see if someone has, yeah. Sure. So while we wait for questions, let me start and let me sort of initiate the conversation. So Shweta, when you were doing this research, I know that the phrase Khula area emanated from the field, so to speak. Um, But do you think that the residents picked it up from the bureaucratic vocabulary? I mean, how do you think? Because like you, I was also very surprised to hear the residents echo this phrase, which sort of has this very inherent vagueness associated with it.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that was my first question, and the second question was, could you say a little bit more about this idea of surveillance and khula? I mean, the relationship between, it seems to me that there is that from the bureaucrats, especially, this apprehension about places that could not be surveilled or could not be managed or controlled. Now, I'm an urban planner by training, and I completely understand, because the urban planning vocabulary is also very much sort of coming from this area of coming from this space of control and management, and so it spaces need to be bounded if they are to be managed. So Khula automatically is a space that is not bounded, that does not have the characteristics and the boundaries and the definitions that is required for bureaucracy to function efficiently. So planning has that very much in its disciplinary language, but you come from a different discipline. So how did you see this? So for me, I saw it in this way, in a very
Yeah, sure.
spatial, in a very bounded speciality sort of way. How did you really see this phrase "khula," coming from from discipline of public health or
Yeah,
epidemiology?
sure,
So
sure.
those were my two questions, and I think we have a couple of different. Yeah, we have other folks also, so we can maybe. So there's someone who is asking, how does the burden of disease stratify across people who live in khula areas and pakka areas? So here, I mean, he's saying khula and pakka as sort of two sides of the coin. Um,
Mhm.
so we can start with these, and then I think more people will jump in.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure. So, thank you so much for your question, Makta. And this is something that helps me to say a lot of things because, for the purpose of presentation, we truncate a lot of things, streamline a lot of things. So, more things are at times required to put things in context. As it goes about the use of term khula, whether, I mean, it is something that residents absorbed from people from the admin. I of course I cannot cannot say for sure, but I don't think so. Why I tell you? Because khula, it's something that I have found. It wasn't a unidirectional administrative adjective that people imposed, the people who were governing this area imposed on the people who they were governing. The people also had very strong ideas about what belongs to the city and what doesn't belong to the city. A lot of people here in Sonia Vihar and many other East Delhi localities, what I managed to observe, they also migrated, of course, from neighboring states, and they were also, most of them were also living in other parts of Delhi in the beginning, rented. So, for instance, Asha was living in Karol Bagh first, and then she realized that she can never own a house there, and she came to this part. So she would often also compare it with those areas and say ye to khula area hai. So they also had, because khula is not just a term, it's the reflection of what are their expectations from the city and contrasted with what they instead get. So the way people use it and the way it is embedded in their narratives, embedded in their understanding of the city, I don't think that it could be just administrative adjective. So people must be using it already. Yes, are you saying
But
something?
no, yeah, the question is that, normally it's this kachi colony that we come
Achhi
across.
colony, yeah.
As
Uh-huh.
urban planners or as people who
Mm-hmm.
have been intervening in informal spaces in urban areas, this is what we normally hear.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
this is my confusion is, when you
Mm-hmm.
already had a term, pakki colony, kachi colony,
Uh,
where this question of government services was
mm-hmm.
very clearly defined as jab pakki colony is, which has an implication of either it is already legalized or it's kind of on its way to becoming legalized,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore government services are going to be provided or are already provided, versus kachi colony, which is sort of neglected by the state.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
this
yeah.
already exists. Now, khula is a new terminology. I
Yeah.
see some overlaps between how you are describing it,
Mm-hmm.
describing the term khula,
Yeah.
and this older kacha pakka thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's where maybe a little bit more. It's not a critique. I'm just saying that a little bit more differentiation, or looking into that literature of kacha pakka, which is plenty actually,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then seeing how khula actually is it an empty. So if there is kacha pakka is not empty because there is a very clear definition.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
khula is an empty signifier of a particular kind.
Mhm.
So how do
Mhm.
these two relate? Why do we need this new term khula?
Yeah, yeah. So
Okay.
Kacha Pakka, they already knew that legal illegal distinction was there. The Kacha Pakka was there, but also, I mean, authorized, unauthorized wasn't there. But I think Khula, what is happening is in case of Khula, there is a lot that they are telling us because, unauthorized expansion is how Delhi has been urbanized.
Yeah.
It's corporation records are not there, etc., etc. But in case of, I mean, Kacha Pakka, of course, is something set. Governance, administrators, of course, they use this terminology. But even the areas which are, I mean, there are a lot of areas which don't come into that binary also, because there are areas even in East Delhi, people have now started paying house tax, water tax, etc. So it's no longer that binary of illegal illegal, so maybe that also gave rise to the new terms. And khula, very interestingly also, because among so many sorry, unauthorized colonies, etc., East Delhi and especially Northeast Delhi borders that I'm talking about, it has several problems that are not there in many other areas. So for instance, it shares border with the neighboring state, it also shares border with Yamuna. So Khula, very literally, which means open, becomes, I think, far more apt term to describe the area maybe for the people, instead of just kacha pakka, because some of the people are paying taxes and they use it to show that see, we pay taxes, we still don't get this. So kacha pakka probably doesn't really capture even for them and even for us to understand the areas like this. And also, I mean, the other one is a very interesting question, this idea of surveillance and khula, how do we look at. So I have been looking at the works of urban planners and geographers, even from CSH, Olivier Tellet's work, etc. And every work also tells you, in addition to many things, that there isn't enough data to understand, especially in the context. I'm quoting Olivier Tellet's work, that in context of dengue, enough data, we need more data. And that is where it's very important to understand where Khula is coming from. Because, every time I talk to MCD people, I tried to get some data that how are you saying that this is the most vulnerable area. So some data is there. So for instance, 2015-16, it recorded the highest number of infection. But there isn't enough data. Whatever exists is also very fragmented. So whenever I ask them which is the most vulnerable area, they'll say Northeast Delhi, Sonia Vihar more specifically, and I'll ask them, in data, I can't see it, because the data is also very fragmented. So say, why look, this is Khula area, we're telling you. So Khula area also acts as a justification for their focus on the areas like this, and despite not having enough statistical data, I mean, enough statistical data. So at times I feel that for several disciplines, this could be the point where they end, that there isn't enough data. But for ethnographer, at the beginning, of course, it was a lot of anxiety for me as well. But eventually, I realized that not having data is also an ethnographic data for me, and my discipline allows for that. So now I can see that despite not having data, how people are justifying, the administrative focus on their governance in this kind of area. Okay, so this is what Khula and the governance could tell us here. I hope I have
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
something to answer
Yeah,
them. Yeah.
yeah, thanks.
So should I
Yeah,
read?
there was another question on how does the burden of disease stratify? I mean, how does the burden of disease change between khula areas and non-khula areas?
Yeah, Khula and Pakka areas. First is like most of the Delhi, I mean, Khula, and rather than Khula and Pakka, I think Kacha Pakka, as we discussed, is far better contrast. And also, as I said, the perception of the frontline workers of the state changes as per the kind of area that they're working in. So, for instance, sometimes in the data, South Delhi being the bigger zone than East Delhi, far bigger zones. I'll tell them that, see, South Delhi has more. So they say, no, it's not because of that. It's the rich people. It's usually the maid who is supposed to clean. She doesn't clean the buckets, etc. Sometimes, and that's why we find sometimes mosquito breeding. So they will also justify not focusing on that kind of area. And sometimes also in the areas like that, by that I mean usually the authorized colonies, middle income colonies, etc. They also won't get entry. So, for instance, people will usually either someone is not home, or the people say through their maid that nobody is home, etc. And people don't get entry. They do not also have that kind of power. And with East Delhi, that equation is really different. So whether or not it's more burden on certain kind of areas, but definitely authorities do see certain areas as more problematic. And that pathology, as we have discussed, has a far broader meaning. So it doesn't just have to do the data around, the disease. So that's how this changes across different kind of areas.
Thanks. So I wanted to bring Shubham into the conversation. I think he's also sitting with Pushpa. So Shubham, do you want to ask your question?
I wanted to know about mana. There was one term in second last slide, mana.
Mm-hmm. I was actually just giving example. It's not really something that is important here in this context. I wasn't saying that Khula area is Vana. I was just telling you that empathy signifier has been developed in a certain context, in the context of mana. So anthropologist, there was a point of time when anthropologists worked a lot on Melanesian societies. So mana, so someone says he has or she has a lot of mana. So it refers to a supernatural force or supernatural power that can be associated with anyone, any human being, any spirit or inanimate objects. So, and mana wasn't a very stable entity and also didn't have a predictable outcome. It can be anything. It can be bad. It can be good. It can be beneficial. So at times mana represented sometimes a spirit, sometimes, I don't know, an object, sometimes magic. Sometimes a shaman is supposed to have more mana. That's why he can have the healing power, etc. And that's why bringing all these studies of mana together, Levi-Strauss, developed this concept of empty signifier out of it. That there are some words, though the words are supposed to have a meaning, that means a signifier is supposed to have a signified. So for instance, if I say tree, there is a tree that I can point to. So there is a signified. But some words do not have a fixed signified, and those words are empty signifiers. So that's how we developed the concept. And now this concept have been used, I think, in several contexts. So as I said, governance, sustainability, more specifically in the context of urban, and also very interestingly by a film critique, a literary critique, using Jaws, the shark in the movie Jaws. So I was just citing that example to give you the context how empty signifier, came into being.
So, I mean, there's also a question about whether kacha and pakka could also be understood as an empty signifier. So I'm assuming, and you answered this in when you were answering my question, and
Mhm.
I'm assuming you're saying no, that those have more clearly defined and articulated
Yeah.
meanings as
Yeah,
compared to what you are
it
proposing.
is, and it also is a very accepted administrative language. Okay, you can't really walk to an administrative officer say, ki, "Show me the map of a Khula area." No, of course not. It's not a term that is, written somewhere. But kacha pakka is a proper administrative category. So I'm also, I mean, not for calling anything an empty signifier. As I also said at the end, that there has to be a political social significance of calling something an empty signifier. So that's one. So no, I don't think that kacha pakka fits into that bill.
Yeah, okay. Can I ask Manoranjan Ghosh to you can unmute yourself and ask your question?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Thanks. Thank you, Shweta. It's a really interesting talk. My question is related to you in your, I mean, in your second last slides in the presentation when you said like the Kula area as the empty signifiers. Just explain me more because I'm very curious to know. Can you apply this another ideas related to as the like the postmodern urban geographer like Edward Sower developed the concept of third space where I mean when you have like a first space and second space like the physical and the perceived space, and when he says like the third space actually mixed. So when you are saying like the Kula area as a empty signifiers, it's really interesting. Can we apply or superimpose these ideas of the third space where you have
Um,
like territories shiftings and the
yes.
imagination also shifting as you mentioned in your stories? Can you tell us?
Um, I do think that, spaces being social is also the idea emerging from geographers like Lefebvre or Edward Soka. This is very useful to understand this idea. But I do think, and I tell you why my specific, I mean, that idea, of course, will help us to understand this, and it's very useful. But I tell you why I'm more inclining towards empty signifier, because there is an instability in the notion of Khula area. And that instability is, I think, makes empty signifier the most suitable framework for us to understand. And that instability is not just at the level of meaning, is also at the level of location. So one, the stability is that what does it mean? So you have seen that spatial geographical qualities are there, definitely. So maybe third space is useful till now. In addition to that, it's a moral attribute. That means the residents who are lying about their identities, who are keeping two IDs, whether or not allegedly, I want to say allegedly, I'm not saying they actually, but allegedly, that's what the perception is, that they're keeping two IDs, etc. After that, you have seen that not just the meaning, even the location gets destabilized. So I cannot really stand anywhere and say, oh, this is Khula area. As an ethnographer, when I put all these meanings together, I can see that even the location of Khula area is very, very unstable. So I think that kind of instability is something that needs a little more than third space. And that's why I will incline more towards, even though third space in general, I think is a very useful idea for us to think about the spaces, specifically urban spaces. But to foreground this instability, we need an idea like as potent as empty signifier to, enable us or help us to understand this instability.
It's also not so much a category of space as a way of seeing a space, the
Yeah.
third space. Yeah, thank you. Manoranjan, did you have anything else, or should we move on to the next person?
Just a small questions adding to that. As an ethnographer, how you track those the imaginaries area? Let's say I'm using this term imaginary. So this imaginaries perceptions of changing the changing dimensions of Kula area, as you mentioned, like the people are saying, oh, this is not Kula area, that area, and during your survey, you also like found like what exactly Kula area is. So
Mhm.
as an ethnographer, how you deals with that the
Yeah.
entire field survey. And it.
With
Thank
the
you.
short answer would be with great difficulty and confusion and panic, because I mean, as of now, the way I've presented, the way anyone would present, it seems as if presentations are very clean, streamlined, and also unfold chronologically. But that didn't happen in the field. After a while working in a certain area, I get to know that there is actually no data to prove that this is vulnerable one. And I have been stumbling on this term khula area, khula area. I also sort of assumed that it means to openness. I mean, literally in Hindi, khula just means open. So they're just referring that it's open, the interstate border is there, etc., etc. And it's only after a while I started realizing that khula means a lot more than it appears to be. So I think it is because of, and I also want to emphasize, thanks to your question, I want to emphasize that everyone who is saying khula know what they mean by Kula. It's only usually because of my privileged ethnographic access to so many utterance of Kula, so many narratives around Kula, I can put it together and show you. So it wasn't really obvious to me in the beginning, and that's where the importance of by as an ethnographer in the field of anthropology, we put so much emphasis on immersive fieldwork, which is carried out for a long term. And that's why this temporal depth comes into picture. That's why, because I have spent so much time in the field, I could access all these different narratives and put it together. So this also didn't happen very neatly, very chronologically. It's something I've stumbled upon, and this is something I think happens to a lot of ethnographers. They stumble upon something very important but in the very beginning of their fieldwork, but sometimes they don't realize the importance of it. And we only realize it a little later. So I also realized it because it was, repeated over time, and the pattern also started becoming clear a little later. So that's how I think it happened.
Thank you, Shweta. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mukta, you need to unmute yourself. Sorry.
Can I call on Nagesh next? Nagesh has a question about migratory people, how to ensure that migratory people make their make friendly spaces in urban areas? And how do you look into it from an anthropological lens? Do you want to speak, unmute yourself and ask?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for very good, insightful sessions in this. So I wanted to ask you one question in the urban regarding. So how to ensure the migratory people to people friendly space for their living purpose and all the living things they have pursued their life in urban areas because they are coming for some purpose like daily wages purpose or any kind of livelihood purpose. So how to ensure the uh, urban location to serve for their life? Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Nagesh, for that question. I think that's important, but also at this point, that's the question that is too big for me to answer very simply through my work. Simply because, my work was also not geared to, to find out how we can ease the life of people who are migrating. But if I attempt to answer it through my work, at times what I have felt is epidemics and epidemic proneness is sometimes at times, I mean, it's fine that the world is becoming more and more connected, and that's why people are migrating all the time, and that migration has definitely enabled certain infections to carry across to travel across border very very rapidly. But at times what happens is, instead of talking about migration, we tend to embody, especially the urban people in city governance, etc., tend to embody in migrants. So if try and answer it through my work, then at least we need to develop both a language and also the policies, which of course pay attention to migration, but don't embody all the problems into the migrants, because I mean that sometimes these people not having that kind of power and agency will be at the receiving end of the stringent glare of the state, as I have described. But of course, they are not the reason why dengue is here. So that would be my answer, but I think it's a very broad question, and that will probably take a multidisciplinary team of urban planners and policymakers, etc., to answer it, I think, better. But I'll be very happy if I can use my work in future to, to think of how the life of migrants can be, because this is the era of migration, and almost all of us, in a way, are migrants.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. I think COVID already, there is a lot of work actually linking migrants' quality of life and disease because of COVID. So there's recent literature which
Yes.
possibly answer your question a little bit better, which is not so specific about one particular disease like Shweta's work is, but more about urban governance and more generic views on that. There are two more questions which are by an anonymous person, so I'll have to read it out because I can't call them in. So one is, how does the idea of one's locality being designated as a Khula affect one's personal sense of civic responsibility and one's expectations of municipal services provided by the government? And do the DBCs that work in the Khula areas also come from families living in those areas? So those are the two questions that are still pending. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that's an important question, and very short answer is yes. Most of the time, the DBCs who are working here, they also usually come from either this area or the adjoining state. So from Meerut, from Sonipat, etc. So the cities in the neighboring state. So most of the time, yes, these are the workers are coming from traveling every day from Ghaziabad, Meerut. These are the cities that share border with Delhi. The cities and the states that share border with Delhi. So yes, most of the time their families are also coming from either from the East Delhi or the neighboring state, and that's important. And that, I think, also goes back to the question Mukta asked, that whether Khula is the administrative adjective or whether people use it on their own. So I do think that further supports this idea that they have been using it on their own. It's not just that people in the governance have told us this. This question is, I'm just going to read it again because I sort of forgot. How does the idea of one locality being designated as Khula affect one's personal sense of civic responsibility and one's expectation of municipal services provided by the government? I think that's important because these two kind of contrast. And also, I don't know whether it instills any sense of the civic responsibility, but people definitely get defensive about their areas and their own domestic spaces. So they'll tell you that my home is very clean, and that's where the complication is, that dengue mosquito actually breeds in clean water only. So that sort of leads to a lot of friction between the residents and especially the frontline workers, because they are the ones who are going on day-to-day basis. So there is a lot of friction that does happen between these two actors in this story of dengue in Delhi. So that is something that does happen. And I'm not sure if being called Khula area is the reason, but in general, I think that's how we can think about these things. So if you, and this was from an anonymous attendee, so I'm not sure if I'll probably need some clarification on this question if the person who's asking lets me know what they meant.
I think it may be coming from what is the engagement with the state. And, if you think you're from a Khula area, how does that affect your behavior in terms of what responsibilities you take, what you expect the state to do? That's how I read the question, if that
Yeah,
helps.
totally.
And you did answer some of that in your,
Yeah,
I mean, you did refer to some of that in your presentation.
Also that, I mean, nobody is really admitting they live in Khula area, even though, they
No,
they
but
say
by negation, like so and so, that is a Khula area.
that is
And
correct.
हमारे यहाँ government services आती है, which means by implication that Khula area is a place where government services are not so. I mean, there's some sort of indirect sort of a statement, but I guess you didn't really, this was not your research question when you went in. So I don't know, maybe harder to answer. Samuel, do you want to ask your question?
Absolutely. Hi, Mukta, and hi, Shweta. Thank you so much for the presentation. I really like the dynamic of it and how you were having this kind of dialogue between your field and the literature at different steps, and it made it very clear to understand. So I really liked this aspect. So I'm also working partly on epidemics in the urban environment in Delhi and so on. And what you were saying about the lack of statistical data was kind of echoing some problematics I'm facing, because you keep on wondering, whereas those areas where the most cases are recorded are really those areas who are most dangerous, or if they're the only ones where it is properly investigated, actually. Having said that, I had one question on a technical aspect, sort of, because you've been observing the sanitation workers on the field. And during this process of, gadda lagana, or even when they are, stuffing, if I understood well, those breeding sites with cotton and so on, there seems to be a lavish use of insecticides. And I was wondering if there's any awareness among them about the fact that there can be insecticide resistance that appears among mosquito populations through times, because by putting so much insecticides, you practice some kind of a selection, and only the most resistant mosquitoes will remain and reproduce. So that was a bit my question, if there's an awareness about this, or if there's other alternative techniques that they are using to mitigate mosquito populations. And thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Samuel. So some awareness at the level of scientists of course know that, and some awareness at times at the level of city administration. So for instance, some official working at the MCT. But with frontline workers, I haven't been, I mean, because it's usually something that they're supposed to do. One, of course, because they know and they have been told that mosquitoes will die. Second, they also have to show that they are continuously working. And this has been one of the very important part of my work. I mean, as of now, this whole data story is not the part of presentation, but they have to show that they are working. So they have to take the picture all the time and send it to the headquarters, etc. And that's why they do it a lot. So when they're saying that every 15 days we come and we pour the dawa again, etc., they actually do it. They do it a lot frequently. Let's say sometimes not even, let's say every week during the dengue season. So as of now, I don't think either that awareness isn't there so much, or it's not really one of the factors which guides their action. So the what guides their action is, one, of course, they are supposed to mitigate the possibility of epidemic, and second, they also have to prove that they are working. So a lot of pictorial evidence of them doing this process of gadde lagana, and the paperwork around it happens, and every time they do it, even every time they refill it. So that's one. And also I wanted to clarify that sanitation workers are slightly different, because these workers are specifically hired to work on dengue. So sanitation workers are not on ad hoc basis, at least not, I mean, there are a lot of people who are regular workers, who are regular employees. So it's a different category of workers that work on drain, etc. So these workers specifically work on checking domestic breeding and spraying insecticides, etc. in the open drains, etc., etc. And yes, you are right, data is one of the things that is, if you're looking for statistical data, it's going to be one of the obstacles in this work.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the clarification about the status of the workers.
Yes, thank you so much.
So there's another question, follow-up question for the DBC workers. That if the DBC workers also live in these spaces, does their usage of Khula also have the negative connotation that the usage by people in power has?
I think it's something that we have also discussed, that, people who are living there, when they use it, what do? They use the word, but at the same time, they also dissociate with it. So they say, yeah, haan, ye tha khula area, either by time, so this used to be Khula area, but this is no longer Khula area. Or this is not Khula area, that one is Khula area, because comparatively, I'm living in a better neighborhood. So that's how they use it. So there is a negative connotation, maybe at the level of governance, etc. But residents, when they use it, they also make sure that they dissociate themselves with it. So that's the dynamic that we need to keep in mind while talking about. So saying that, yeah, it has negative connotation will be far more like, will be an oversimplification. So yes, there are things that have been associated with it, but everyone makes sure that they are not seen as inhabiting Khula area. So that is something that is, I think, important for all of us to note and remember.
Thanks, Shweta. I don't have any more questions. If anyone has is now thinking of something, please, we still have time to answer questions and discuss, or even to offer, if you have comments to offer, please do raise your hand and I'll get you into the conversation. But I was curious, what's the afterlife of this investigation for you? I mean, is this like, this is as far as I can go with this, and now I put it out into the world and other folks need to develop it further? Or is this like one of those things that has actually developed into an afterlife for you in terms of what research you want to do?
Okay, yeah, sure. Yes, definitely. I mean, it is emerging from my doctoral work. So right now, of course, I'm preparing it and sending it out for publications, etc. But that has, in fact, the idea of pathology is something that I ended up developing a little later stage in my PhD, because initially it started as a multi-species ethnography, mosquito-human mosquito relationship in the context of dengue, very, very focused on dengue. But the idea of pathology and why it allows me to keep things open-ended, because there are now several kind of pathologies that I can work with. And this is something that I think this work is leading me towards, maybe a postdoctoral project or work, whatever. So I do think that now that, and everyone knows that Northeast Delhi also ended up becoming the site, riots. So how is it that in the imagination of governance, in the imagination of city administration, etc., how several kind of pathologies, emerge, several kind of pathologies, are conflated. So that's where I think this work is going to go, because, I mean, at the time of doctoral work, all this idea of social political pathologies were not so much the focus. the focus was epidemics and the disease and the infection, etc. But now, during the course of fieldwork, I have realized that the lot of because I mean there is not enough data, and that's why there is a space that often administrators fill up through their ecological, social, political biases, and even knowledge, ecological knowledge, etc. So this kind of conflation of several pathology is something that I might be interested in looking at maybe right after this project. So that's where I think it's going to go.
At a larger scale, I mean, there has been talk about compound crises, and so I mean, you're seeing it as a pathology, as pathologies, but people have spoken about compound crises for cities, and
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. That's a nice word, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I can refer you to the
Yeah.
literature.
Mhm.
I don't think there's anyone else. I mean, there are still folks here. Does anyone want to jump in with comments and further inputs? All right, I think people are still recovering from Holi.
Yeah. Oh,
Or
maybe
it's
Holi.
oh, Partho is in. Partho was waiting for everyone else to finish. Partho, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry I missed a lot of your presentations. I'm not sure whether what I'm asking is already there, but what is the sort of opposite? What is the sort of the Band area, the restricted story, and what are the technologies for sort of closing that off? Is that something that you already discussed? I'm just wondering how this concept can travel in terms of both its expansiveness, but also its opposite. I mean, how do you see the opposite of this particular concept going forward?
Yes. Thank you so much. It's a very important question, I think. It is there in the work, but I didn't as much. I mean, it would have taken us to a very different trajectory in the presentation, and that's why I didn't emphasize it much. But those who have been hearing would remember that there was also some comparisons with South Delhi. So I haven't been able to make Khula, the apparent antonym, of course, would be Band linguistically, but I haven't been able to get any sort of like linguistic opposite, but conceptually we have been getting this opposite. I have been getting this opposite during the narratives and during the interviews. So for instance, there would continuously be a comparison with South Delhi. So for instance, those who have heard the testimony of CMO, so who said that South Delhi workers have tabs and our workers just unionize. So वहाँ unionबाजी का चक्कर है. So I think, yes, very parallelly, we can see an opposite of Khula, the area how urban should be, how a city should be. So how, let's say, South Delhi is, or how Pakki colonies are. So workers are more efficient workers, one of the characteristics. People who are more responsible, people whose identities you can trace, people who don't really keep two IDs, who are from Delhi, let's say, okay, and people who also are responsible enough either to curb mosquito breeding on their premises or to let the state or representatives of state check. So the people who are the obedient workers and subservient workers, etc. So these are the characteristics, if not the word, the characteristics definitely we are getting, and eventually that's why I think it's also important to look at this through the idea of empathy signifier. That's why, because it allows us to look at all these contrasting images. So one is good area and what kind of city, what kind of place a city should be, and what kind of place a city shouldn't be. So that's what I think it could be. To contrast Khula and Band, even though we didn't get the word, but there are contrasts and dichotomies that we can look at, and we can that can help us understand the cities.
Thanks.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you, Partho. I think we are kind of done, and that's a good note also to end an urban workshop on, where, you take that research and you sort of think about the larger questions and how to think through the larger questions, which I'm sure you have addressed in your doctoral dissertation. And this is, as I understand, one aspect of it that you've presented here today. So look forward to that being out and available for reading, the rest of the work as well. And thank you so much for being here today. Thank you everyone for staying till the end, and we'll be back next month, and watch out for the announcement sometime during mid-April.
Yes, thank you so much for the invite. I have been following this series, and that has been very important. It has given me very important insights for my work as well. And thanks everyone for joining and their engagement.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Shweta.
much.
Bye, everyone.
Right, bye.